for sure. Let's go to Robert's presentation, and then we'll take questions afterwards. So,
Okay,
Robert,
hello.
out there?
Yep, I'm on. Can you guys hear me?
Sure.
Yep.
Sorry.
Awesome.
Sorry.
Let me see
Yep.
if I can share my slides here.
All right. And if you want to introduce yourself as well, that would be great.
Yes, I'm on. Do you guys see presentation mode now?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. My name is Robert Hampshire. I'm a faculty member at University of Michigan in the Public Policy School and also the Transportation Research Institute. So I want to tell you guys about a set of activities that we've been leading for the last 9 months. And really, we're trying to build a resource for our community, which we call like a knowledge network, not just data, but we're trying to draw insights from all the mobility activity, all the different pilots, experiments, to really drive towards insights and the evidence base that can help us move forward. And we've been able to use this evidence base and perspective with the city of Detroit during COVID on 2 related projects. One has to do with food delivery and food insecurity and transportation insecurity. So those who came down with COVID in Detroit, can we get food delivered to them in an efficient, safe manner? Also, particularly low-income households who don't have access to smartphones or internet, guess what? They're probably not getting delivery services from Postmates or Uber Eats, right? So we're all getting delivery now, but not everyone. And those folks who don't have access to these food apps, are subject to more exposure due to traveling to and from the grocery store. So we're working with them actively on that. And then also in the wake of the outbreak, we work with using this framework, the city to help them redistribute their micromobility scooter assets to places throughout Detroit that are basically transit deserts, and using first mile, last mile connections to the new reduced bus schedules. But we'll just tell you quickly about the framework, and then hopefully we can get some discussion. So this work has been funded by the National Science Foundation. It's 2 ongoing grants. So I'll preach to the choir a little bit. We know that, all the new technologies, ride share, bike share, scooters, drones are here. But what we're concerned about in this project is that, the current transportation system is inefficient and inequitable, and it continues to be. One of the leaders of the Freedom Rides, C.T. Vivian, just died 3 days ago. And this, Freedom Rides were about integrating transportation in the South. And it turns out that in many ways, the transportation system is currently just as inequitable as it was even back then. And so in Detroit, a few years ago, you guys may know James Robertson. He walks 21 miles. Well, he travels 21 miles to work. Part of it was on transit, and the rest of it he walked. So that's 21 miles a day. He did that for 20 years. This is an unbelievable commute, and he's not the only one. Even if you can imagine now during COVID, when the bus system that he was taking, it reduced to weekend hours, right? So many bus systems said, okay, we'll reduce service to weekend hours, but he was still an essential worker. So how does he get to and from work? And so there's, real challenges that you guys are all so familiar with. But of course, it's not just James. Part of the approach we're taking in this project, and it's something speaks to what Susan mentioned before. I want to speak to her, that it's not just people like James who are suffering, but the housing market in the U.S. is about estimated about $1.6 trillion lower in value because of lack of transportation access. We know that every year people miss medical appointments because of lack of transportation. And I think a potential path forward for public transit and mobility is expanding the scope of the stakeholders to really look at the outcomes. So be that in the housing market, be that in the medical market, be that in jobs. And so really building that coalition that's into the mobility, particularly public transit, to bring more resources, particularly lobbying power in some of these bills. So of course, we got to address these, and that's what this project is about. So we've been working with folks, we interviewed about 100 folks around the country in the mobility space, planning space. Here are great folks who are really trying to dig into, who are right now dealing with the COVID crisis firsthand and what mobility looks like. But from our interviews, we found that, and you guys know, the amount of information that's scattered across multiple sources is incredible, from all the different pilot sites, FTA sandboxes. You have every city has their own, pilot and data set, and news is coming out. Everyone's on different email lists. And so, how do you pull all this stuff together in a way that, is meaningful and insightful, particularly when we see the evidence base for how mobility impacts outcomes in people's lives is really weak. So this is sort of a speaking to the research folks, like the evidence base of how all this stuff is actually impacting people is almost non-existent. There's, pilots here and there, but the preponderance of evidence is not quite there. Things that, like, I'll talk to Susan now again, like folks, the car share, like early on, were able to show, through, experimental, randomized type, matching studies, what the evidence is. And I think what we want to do with this project is sort of build up some of that evidence as well. So let me just move a little bit faster. So here at University of Michigan, this was a project that had roughly about 20 faculty members and PhD students. I was leading it, but we have folks, high-level folks from computer science, our Transportation Research Institute, because it's safety. There's major equity issues, as you guys know, related to safety. Tile, who's in urban systems and operations research. And I want to point out Maggie Levinson, who runs this called ICPSR, and it's the largest repository of social science data in the world. Basically, every university in the US is a member of this ICPSR. And so we're sort of trying to bridge the gap between social sciences and transportation together to really try to look at outcomes. Now, I'll move a little bit faster, but the project had a lot of folks involved, not just at the University of Michigan. We had folks from Urban Institute, National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and others that I'll tell you about shortly. So we had I'll move this along, a workshop in Ann Arbor in November. We also, did about 100 or so interviews, and what came out of it is, someone mentioned earlier, this focus, the medium and small size cities are really in need right now of support, technical assistance, and different types of solutions. Now, so seems to be a big gap there. Also measuring unmet demand. I think a lot of the data that we have, be it from like GPS providers or be it from NHTS, those are trips that were taken. A lot of the inequity is driven by trips not taken, right? And so from that standpoint, I think, and now we know in COVID, we're all like not taking trips, right? We all have this latent demand. And so I think we understand it's a key sort of leverage point in this equity conversation. So let's move forward. We built actually a sample of this knowledge network, which basically links together a lot of public and mainly public data, but private data as well, to try to get insights around equity. And so, we, during this phase one, really have tried to hone in that this is a viable problem. We put together a framework to look at it, and really, we want to look at outcomes. So let me just show you guys how we really are framing this. So give me a couple more minutes. So we started this project 9 months ago, and it turns out we framed it around the public health model. And so it just turns out that now we're in COVID. I think everyone now has a feeling for the public health model. So it has four quadrants. The first one is really measuring and monitoring inequity. So that's kind of like the testing, testing. I think a lot of what we have is passive testing in transportation. Like we have surveys that go out occasionally, right? And that's kind of like testing for the, when people come to the hospital and it may be too late, but we could do more proactive kind of measurement of inequality. The second step is who's actually at risk and protective factors. So, in COVID, it's, older adults with certain symptoms. We can do the same thing with transportation inequity. The third part is develop and test countermeasures. This is really where this is like the vaccine phase, like, can we find some remedies? And it turns out that evidence base about what these remedies are is not clear. I would argue. And so we're trying to put together, there's a lot of pilots and there's a lot of evidence, that we can start to do syntheses and meta syntheses on about how band pool programs impact, outcomes. How does, Uber and Lyft trips to the hospital or medical appointments, does that work? Well, some say yes, some say no. So that part is the countermeasures. And then finally, once we find things that work, how do we get that out there? And that's sort of through a peer learning platform. So and then ultimately what's in the middle that we're building is the knowledge network is basically a big data information system that connects all these pieces together. And let me just fast forward a little bit to show you a couple things. So I have a couple more slides. So one thing, so we have a lot of, we put together a bunch of partners on this project. And part of what we want to do is have partners that can expand the notion of what mobility and the impact of the mobility system is. And so we've been working with the Federal Reserve of Chicago because they're really, especially during COVID right now, are really trying to understand employment and accessibility to jobs. And it turns out that measures of like spatial mismatch just don't do it. Like if you look in the ACS, if someone owns a car, sure, that's fine. But guess what? That car doesn't work. Or guess what? Like they can't afford the insurance. Or, they share that car with 3 other people. So the Federal Reserve was very interested, and I think could be a partner to expand the pie, particularly from a resources standpoint. We're talking about money and funding things at a large scale. It has to do with job accessibility. And so they have a tool called Peer Cities tool that really compares cities in the US that are similar in their economic and resiliency profile. And so we're adding transportation dimensions to that. Another partner, maybe somewhere on the line now, is at SumSea. So part of it is that they have we know they have a great learning center that has a knowledge base of many case studies. And so what we're going to do is basically turbocharge the learning center so that all the interconnections and linking it to live data, linking it to the underlying data sets are there so it can be more widely available. And then for this project, we have a bunch of many other partners that were signed on. We're finished phase 1. We're in the phase of fundraising for phase 2 to build some of these things out. But some of the other key partners are Urban Institute, because we have to really work deeply in communities to really understand the impact of mobility, particularly now in the time of COVID. And so what I'll do is actually, let me move down here. Actually, I'll just sort of stop here and say that during this phase 1, this framework we've put together and these partners, we've been able to directly support the city of Detroit, like I said, as related to food food and transportation insecurity, but also their micromobility strategy vis-a-vis reduced bus routes using the same underlying data and analytics platform. So, and this is an invitation for all those who are here. If there's other aspects of this, we want to pull in real-time news sources. Everyone's on email lists, journal research articles to really try to piece together the story from the research and evidence standpoint about how all this activity is impacting equity. So I will stop there.